Okay, let's dive into a story about something we all make every single day: trash. But believe me, this is not your average story about taking out the garbage. We're talking about millions of tons of Canadian trash sparking this huge, high-stakes political and economic fight between two countries that are supposed to be best friends. All right, let's just start with a number: 3.46 million. That's how many tons of waste from Canada got trucked across the border and dumped into Michigan landfills in just 1 year. To give you a sense of what that looks like, we're talking about roughly 100,000 semi-trucks, a whole convoy, rolling down the highway. And all of that garbage, it has to end up somewhere. So the big question is, why Michigan? Well, it all comes down to simple economics, really. Michigan charges a landfill fee, they call it a tipping fee, of just 36 cents a ton. Now, compare that to its neighbor, Ohio, which charges $4.75. 36 cents versus almost $5. I mean, with a price difference that huge, Michigan basically became a giant magnet for the entire region's garbage. And that's what brings us to the core question we're tackling today. How on earth did a local trash problem explode into this massive political crisis on both sides of the border? Because this isn't just a story about cheap landfills. No, it's about a wild chain reaction. How a seemingly small state policy issue in Michigan just spiraled and spiraled until it became a full-blown international trade dispute, pulling in top leaders in both the US and Canada. All right, so first up, let's really get a handle on the sheer scale of this river of trash flowing across the border and what it actually means for Michigan.
So when you look at the breakdown here, it's pretty eye-opening. Yeah, okay, most of the trash in Michigan landfills comes from Michigan itself, that makes sense, but check this out. A whopping 14.35% comes directly from Canada. Think about that. That makes Canada, by a long shot, the single biggest source of imported trash for the entire state.
Now, for years, politicians in Michigan have been trying to figure out how to stop this flow of trash. And that brings us to their biggest, most ambitious attempt to solve it at the state level. And, well, why it completely and utterly failed. So Governor Gretchen Whitmer came in with what seemed like a pretty simple solution. She said, let's just raise that landfill fee. And not by a little bit. She wanted to go from that tiny 36 cents all the way up to $5 a ton. The thinking was pretty clear: get rid of that massive financial incentive for trucks from Canada and other states to use Michigan as their dumping ground. But the proposal hit a political brick wall, and it hit it hard. Business groups, they went on the offensive immediately. They launched this huge campaign against it, and they were smart about it. They didn't call it an import fee. Nope. They framed it as a trash tax that was going to hurt Michigan's own people, residents, hospitals, schools, by jacking up the cost for them to get rid of their own garbage. And here's the kicker: the opposition had a really powerful legal argument on their side. It's all because of something in the U.S. Constitution called the Commerce Clause. Basically, it means Michigan wasn't allowed to create one set of rules for out-of-state trash and another for its own. Any fee hike had to be applied to everyone, equally. So the plan to stick it to the importers would also hit the locals. And just like that, the trash tax was dead on arrival. Okay, so with Michigan basically powerless to solve this problem on its own, the whole thing just escalated. It went from being a state-level headache to something much, much bigger. Suddenly, this river of trash became a bargaining chip in the super complicated, high-stakes world of international trade. And this timeline here really shows you the ticking clock that Ontario's government was suddenly up against. First, you've got these new U.S. penalties that put garbage trucks at risk. Then Michigan's big plan to fix the problem fails. And looming over all of it is this mandatory 2026 review of the big trade deal, the USMCA. That review put the very tariff exemptions that made this whole operation affordable in jeopardy. It really looked like the door to Michigan's landfills could slam shut at any moment. So, facing this potential crisis, losing its main dumping ground, the government of Ontario realized it had to do something, and it had to do it fast. And Ontario's Premier, Doug Ford, he did not mince words. He came right out and connected the dots, linking the province's next move directly to the threat of the U.S. closing the border to Ontario's trash. For him, building a new landfill at home wasn't just about waste management. It was about economic survival, a kind of geopolitical defense move. So what was that move? It was something called Bill 5. And it was a really controversial law designed to do just one thing: ramp through a massive new landfill near a small town called Dresden. And here's the part that got everyone talking. To make it happen fast, the government took this pretty incredible step of just suspending the normal environmental review process, just for this one project. You just don't see that happen very often.
And this is where this huge international trade standoff comes crashing down to earth, right in the middle of a small farming community. A global problem suddenly becomes a very, very local fight.
And the local opposition was, you guessed it, fierce. Just listen to this quote from a local councillor, Rhonda Jubinville. She said, the biggest worry wasn't even just the dump itself. It was the fact that the government was just tossing out all the environmental safeguards that are supposed to be there to protect their land, their water, and the air they breathe.
But you have to understand, the stakes for Ontario here are just massive. I mean, projections show that if that U.S. border slams shut, the entire province runs out of landfill space by 2034. Just try to imagine that. Millions of people with literally nowhere to put their garbage. So for the government, this fight over one landfill in Dresden, it's really about preventing a catastrophic province-wide crisis. And so that's where we're left. You've got this international standoff, right? Driven by big money and trade policy on one side. And on the other, you've got this passionate local fight to protect the environment. So in this huge North American garbage standoff, the big question remains, is it going to be the trade wars or the town halls that ultimately decide where all the trash goes?